Hi, everyone, and welcome to week 7. You might notice my background's a little different today, and actually, I'm representing the Lamb School, but a little more casual. I'm working from home today, and I'm sorry the lighting's terrible. Um, but you don't care about that. So this week, there's two things I want to talk about. One is the content that we're covering this week, which is qualitative methods. And then the second thing is that you'll be submitting your project, the written portion of your project, where you are making recommendations based on the survey data for how you would promote things about the Lamb School to undergraduate students. So I'll talk about that first. So again, the purpose of this is for you to demonstrate that you can make recommendations and justify recommendations based on data that you have analyzed using these statistical methods. And so the homework assignment for last week was to sort of get you started to thinking about, okay, how can I make a hypothesis? How can I test it? And one of the things that I think some people realized last week was you may make a hypothesis, and the statistical test shows you that the things that you thought might matter, the things you thought there would be a statistical difference, they're not there, right? Especially if you're running a ANOVA t-test, where you might think that two variables, two scales are related, highly correlated, and they're not, or they're lowly correlated. And sometimes finding no difference, finding no significant difference, finding no correlation, that's an important finding because we could plan an entire campaign based on our assumptions that, for example, gender or sex is really highly correlated with like someone's willingness to tell others about this school, right? And this is totally made up. But, and so you might say, well, because, we assume that females are more likely than males, we would either really go hard in on the females or we would try to reach out to males and start a campaign to ask them to start talking to their friends, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you ran the statistics and found out there's actually no significant difference between those groups, that's probably not a good angle to go on. So no, we tend to focus on wanting to find significant results. And this is, again, what happens when, most of the research articles that you read, that's what we're reporting, but sometimes no results also matters. So, and the other thing as you're working on that report is remember, you can make things based on your statistical observations or statistical analyses, but also you can make those based on other observations that maybe you have made from the data or even just from your own knowledge of the Lamb School, those kind of things. So if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to ask either about running the analysis or what the analysis means or just putting together that report. So this week we're talking about qualitative methods and we just don't have time to dive really deeply into those. I will say that qualitative methods, and I think I talked about this earlier, that is really what I was trained in when I was in graduate school. My dissertation was based on in-depth interviews and then analysis of that. So I have run focus groups, I have planned focus groups. So I really, really love qualitative research. I think it is, as someone in communication, I love the richness of it. It's so much more than just these numbers. And so it can be a really valuable tool, talking to people and getting information and making observations or, doing a thematic analysis of tweets that people write about the Lamb School. We could probably learn a lot about that. And so great. But a couple of cautionary things that I think is always good to remember, just in terms of you making decisions and also how you present that data to others, is that one of the limitations of qualitative data is it really is not generalizable, right? So we don't have that statistical thing to say, I ran this test and based on my survey and my sample and the sample size, I know with 95% degree of certainty that my results are correct, right? So we don't have that. And so we have to be careful and not couch it, but really talk about it in the way of, we ran several focus groups. And one of the things that the chapter will talk about, this idea of saturation. So rather than knowing I need this certain sample size so that I can get the statistical significance that I would want, is I either keep talking to people or keep holding focus groups until I just don't get new information. I don't get new opinions. I don't get really radically different ideas. And there might be multiple ideas within that, but as I talk to enough people, I start to feel like, okay, I think this really covers the majority of opinions or thoughts that people had. So that's why you want to make sure too, you're not making a case based on, I interviewed one person and this is just what they said. And so just recognizing that limitation and being careful not to use one unique case necessarily to build a whole campaign, but to talk to people. And then too, when you're choosing your participants for a qualitative study, it's equally important that you do want to have a representative sample, just like you would in a quantitative study, right? So do you want, if you're thinking in marketing, like who's our target audience, who's our demographic, who are we talking to within that? And then also, are we talking within the range of that? And depending on how large or small your target audience is, that's going to determine. The other thing about qualitative methods to keep in mind is they tend to be much more time consuming. So in a survey, it takes a while, maybe you're generating your questions, but as long as you can get respondents, all of a sudden you have this data file and we can pop it into software like SPSS. And if you have the knowledge of how to run those tests, very quickly you can get results. So it tends to be much faster and a lower cost method. Whereas qualitative methods, it inevitably takes time. So if you're holding a focus group, there's the planning for the group, there's the actual focus group that you hold that could be, around an hour or so. And then you have this data, oftentimes it will need transcribed and it will need analyzed. So and depending on how many interviews you do, or if you want to go into this, the store and observe how people are interacting in this space with the products, it's the time to observe, it's the taking of notes, and then it's the analyzing. So that is another thing just to keep in mind about that. But again, if you have any questions this week for the discussion question, we are looking at a published article that has used qualitative methods. So I think you'll see too kind of the contrast in what conclusions this article is able to make and recommendations versus what the previous articles that were quantitative. So have a great week and I will see you in class.